Welcome, everyone, to the Detroit Institute of Arts Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Amanda Harrison, a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. Today, we're hearing a brand new lecture series on artists of Detroit. Detroit has produced many talented and famous artists, and through this Highlights tour, we're going to look at some of their remarkable works featured in the DIA's collection. Part 2 will premiere on June 10th. As always, we want to encourage you to ask questions during the program. You can do this on our Facebook page in the comments section or by signing into the YouTube page using your personal Gmail account to leave a public comment. Questions will be read on screen by our own Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. And joining us today are trained docents Howard Rosenberg, Ray Henney, and Tana Jenkins. Welcome, team. How are you?
Nice to see you, Amanda.
Nice to see you.
Afternoon, everyone.
I think Tana is going to be getting us started today. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are super excited to talk to you about Detroit artists. Detroit, we're going to be covering art from the 1800s through the present. Detroit, as most of you probably know, has a really rich history. It's full of adventure, innovation, and activism. Everything from Native American settlements to a booming auto industry to rebellion, civil rebellion, to the current comeback that's got hep kids from all over the world moving to our fantastic Motor City. And that rich history has inspired an equally rich art scene that's full of variety and meaning. And so without further ado, I am going to pass the mic to Ray. Ray, take it away.
Thanks so much, Tana. This is very exciting. And we're really going to start with someone who had, during his time frame, an international reputation as being one of the master painters of his generation. And the reputation he enjoys in the art community, the art history community, still today. His name is Gauri Melchers, and he lived in 1860 through 1932. He was born and raised right here in Detroit. His father was an immigrant from Germany, but he was also an accomplished sculptor and artist. He created objects for the Crystal Palace in London when he was still in Germany, and for the Detroit City Hall when he immigrated from Germany. Later, he became the vice president of Stroh Brewing Company when his sister, Gauri Melchers' aunt, married into the Stroh family. Now, Gauri Melchers demonstrated significant artistic talent at a young age, and so they sent him to Europe to study art, beginning with 4 productive years at the prestigious Academy of Art in Dusseldorf, Germany. And then he studied at the Academy in Juilliard in Paris. Melcher's training in Paris caused him to lighten his palette or his color choices from the darker German style that was taught in Dusseldorf. It resulted in Melcher's tendency to bathe the subject matter of his painting with strong light that appeared in front of a dark background. He was extremely highly acclaimed, and his paintings were selected to be shown in the exhibitions of the highly prestigious Académie des Beaux-Arts for 25 consecutive years. Truly remarkable for an American. But what was more remarkable is that he won various awards and was the first American to do so at this extremely prestigious academy. He was so famous and so well respected that in 1921, he was selected to be the chairperson of the commission to establish the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., in the spot where it exists today. Now, Melcher split his time between Europe and the United States until World War I. Then Melchers and his wife moved back to the United States from Germany, and they settled in a place near, I think it was Fredericksburg. It's Fredericksburg, Virginia, where they purchased a home with acreage called Belmont. It was a 18th century home of historic importance. After Melchers died, his wife donated Belmont to be a museum of Melcher's work. And that museum exists today and is an historic landmark. Next slide, please. I should comment, Kimmy is the person who runs our slides and creates them for us, and she does a wonderful job. We very much appreciate her efforts. So this is an engraving of the Detroit Art Exhibition that occurred in 1883. Both Gauri Melchers and his father were part of the founding of the Detroit Museum of Art in 1885. And this engraving done by Melchers showed this special loan exhibit that occurred in 1883 and was so popular that it inspired the founding of the Detroit Museum of Art, which eventually became the DIA. Melcher's father actually created, Kimmy, could you use your cursor and that large statue? Yeah, that's statue of Cadillac. That was actually done by Melcher's father, and for years was in the Detroit City Hall. Melchers also painted the first commissioners of the Detroit Museum of Art. Melchers was extremely well known internationally and extremely popular in Detroit because he was such a known and accomplished painter. And he painted a series of Detroit portraits of Detroit social elite. It was very prestigious to have a portrait done by him. Now, two of the three paintings we're going to be exploring today are portraits of the daughters of prominent Detroit families. Could we go to the next slide, Kimmy? Right. This is currently on display in the American wing of the DIA. It's Helen Thrip Prawl. Melchers completed this painting in 1884. It's over 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, and it's oil on canvas. And this is a large 3/4 portrait. Those are expensive. And it shows the 18-year-old Helen Lothrop, who was the daughter of a very very wealthy Detroit family. Her father actually was on the board of the trustees of the Detroit Museum of Art. And he also served as ambassador to Russia. He knew then President Grover Cleveland, and he traced his ancestries to the Mayflower. Her father commissioned this painting as a kind of very expensive announcement concerning the availability of his daughter for marriage. Howard, did you send out postcards when you turned 18 to announce your availability? This is to mark the social debut of an eligible debutante. But what her father had in mind for his daughter was for her to be eligible for the right and proper suitor, one who comes from a family with high social and economic status. During this Victorian era, fathers still had a strong voice in their daughters' marriage choices. This work is really an excellent example of what I was just discussing a minute ago about Melcher's training in German and French art. You've got this dark background in the German style, but then you have the bright light dramatically revealing the young woman, which is influenced by the French approach. This painting is purposely designed to show the wealth and status of the family. You have this amazing dress, and in person it is stunning to see in the gallery. Melchers creates the dress through using soft shades of various colors of the same tones and fluid strokes. She has the signs of a debutante because she has the flowers, holding the flowers, and she has this unbuttoned wrinkled glove, which was a sign of the times as to her eligibility or coming out. Her posture, however, is not that of a young lady, but is extremely, very proper posture. And this strong light reveals penetrating eyes and this unsmiling face. It was meant to convey the fact that this would be a serious companion to an important man. Next slide, please. This is also a Melcher's portrait. This is the Communicant, which Melchers did in to around 1900. It's also very large. It's over 6.5 feet tall and 4.5 feet wide. And that's the original frame. It's carved and gilded in the American Renaissance style, and it's shown that way. This one is also displayed in the American wing. And it's just displayed with that magnificent frame. Now, this painting is of a 16-year-old daughter of the very wealthy Detroit family that immigrated from Holland, that were the Vanderbiljs. The painting is to commemorate their daughter's becoming a communant, which is a member of a church who is entitled to take communion. She is wearing actually what was then contemporary Dutch clothing, or a costume. And what's interesting about this painting, particularly when you can stare at it at the museum, is how she looks out at the viewer. She seems lost in contemplation. She is embodying innocence and sort of an inward spiritual grace. Her pose also is reminiscent of religious paintings, such as the Madonna, and is in the style of Northern European Renaissance masters. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the fencing master that Melchers completed around the same time, in around 1900. This is extremely large. It's 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It's full length, oil on canvas. This is a small group, one of a small group of full-length pictures that Melchers painted of men dressed in their occupational roles. These work were not commissioned portraits, but this was Melchers' exploration of design and of expressiveness. He posed these individuals in settings and clothes characteristic of their occupations and meant to convey about them and their occupation on a more human emotional level than worrying about status and symbols of wealth or symbols of prestige. This is a powerful painting. Howard, it's just amazing in the gallery, isn't it? And that male subject eludes confidence and attitude. I mean, isn't he, Howard? He's an intimidating figure.
He's in your face.
Yeah, you're not going to mess with him. You're just not going to mess with him. But it's, of the three paintings, all of which are stunning, this one, on a personal basis, makes quite a wonderful impression. So, in sum, we have the DIA is displaying currently these three beautiful paintings, which are outstanding examples of Melchers' mastery of painting and his stunning talent. Melchers is truly a significant figure in the history of art, and he's really a Detroit treasure. Questions?
Ray, we have a few comments. We have an exclamation of wow for Gauri Melchers, and then a thank you from a viewer from Germany. So, Gauri Melchers' family hails from that area. So thank you for our viewer from Germany. And then there's a comment about the fencer, and that he's daring you. He's looking you, straight forward in the eyes, and he's confronting you.
Yeah, and in the gallery, he really is, and he has more attitude than anyone I've ever seen. He's got a lot of it. Well, Howard, are you next?
I believe I am.
All right.
Thank you, Ray. So, Ray used a term that Melchers was using his expressiveness to paint the fencer. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Melchers was a big deal in the early part of the 20th century. Our guy here, Gordon Newton, was a big deal in the middle part of the 20th century. In fact, Gordon was a Detroit painter, stayed in Detroit, lived in Detroit, worked in Detroit, never left Detroit except when he was young. So let's start talking about him and the Detroit artists of the mid-century. The Cass Corridor, for those of you that aren't familiar with Detroit, is nearby the Detroit Institute of Arts. Across the street the DIA is located on Woodward. 1 block west is Cass Avenue. The Cass corridor is considered the area from Woodward west to the Lodge Expressway, surrounded by Wayne State University campus. And there was a group of artists that later became called the Cass Corridor Artists that worked from in the late 60s and the 70s. When Sam Wagstaff was the DIA curator of contemporary art in 68 through 71, he championed them. He promoted them. He later went to New York to become, to do contemporary art curatorial work there. So the Cass Corridor artists were composed of a group of people, which we are going to talk about either today or next time, that included John Egner, an instructor at Wayne State University's art school, Nancy Michnick, who is around today, Ray knows her well, Robert Sestak, and Gordon Newton. This group of artists were considered to be neo-expressionists, and that means they were freewheeling, experimenting in many media, expressing their feelings through their art, through their use of media. They used crayons, they used paint, they used wood, they used wax. They did it on paper or canvas, or actually anything else they felt like. They felt like anything they used with intention could be turned into art. Gordon's art, Newton's art, has been called beautiful in unexpected ways and always provocative. He's said to have long understood how to use abstract expressionism, that is color and form without figuration, and minimalist, small, repetitive, geometric shapes, and various other visual languages to deepen his work's intensity. So over the years, he explored lots of different things. He explored social problems, time, motion, energy, cultural phenomenon, games of chance, technology, architectural concerns, sculpture, and painting. He was born in 1948 in Detroit, but they moved many places. They moved to Plymouth, Michigan. They moved to Canton, Ohio. The family did. They moved to Kansas. And then they eventually came back here to Port Huron, where he went to school at the Port Huron Art School, and he trained with Vincent McFarlane. He then transferred to the Detroit School of Arts and Craft, which is now the Center for Creative Studies. He left there and enrolled at Wayne State University, where he met John Egner, and then he started drawing. So let's go to the first drawing, please. So here you see two pieces. They're both done in 1972. We acquired them in 1999. They're black crayons on paper, and they're marks. Mark making is a very modern way of creating art. The mark maker intentionally creates the art. It's not random. He's doing it, or she is doing it, with an intent of creating a piece. Sometimes it's spontaneous, but it's never random. If you look at this untitled piece seems to just be squiggles and marks. But let's think about this. Let's think about Newton standing on the roof of his 3 or 4 story apartment building that he lived in the Cass Corridor, looking down. And what does he see? He sees a landscape of cars and streets and people. So what's he producing here? It may be a cityscape looking down from the top of his building. And this was his expressing his artist's freedom to do what he wants. And it's kind of like an action painting, because he used his entire, well, almost his entire body, but his full arm to come across the paper and create the action. It wasn't just a little tiny mark like that. He used everything he could to push that.
Howard, you're right. These are not random. These are really tight compositions.
And he did, Ray, he did a ton of these. I mean, he didn't just do one or two. He did hundreds of these pieces. So next piece is, now let's look at this piece. This piece is a 38 by 50 inch untitled piece done with paint, crayon, graphite, and it's collage. It's torn paper. It's used with tape, and it's an abstract landscape that produces the atmosphere like the outside of an auto plant. It's the belching smoke and heat, but it's disorienting. There's no horizon line, and so we, the viewers, are left to float in space. And in order to achieve this effect, Newton used his entire body to create this piece. He actually laid down on it, dragged his body across it, dragging the dirt and grinding it in. So talk about getting into the paper. This made a big impression on a lot of people, creating this art. Newton was considered one of the leaders of the cast corridor art. Everybody has a patron. Every artist throughout history has a patron, and Newton was no different than that. He had a patron named James Duffy, who owned the Edward Duffy and Company pipe and valve company in Detroit. And in 1999, Duffy donated his collection of Newton's pieces, 500 drawings, 40 sketchbooks, 2 paintings, 12 sculptures, plus folders of archival material to the museum, where the museum has conserved them in their prints and drawing archives. We have over 2,600 of his prints, drawings, sculptures, paintings, and other mixed media. Let's go to the next slide. This is one of the favorite ones we have. And Duffy said, this is his quote, I'm going to read it. "I've had so many of his works. I'd see them in the morning when I got up and before I went to sleep. Sometimes I take my flashlight to see what's going on in the dark period. A lot of them can be unattractive on the surface, but you've got to get away from the obvious to figure it out. I didn't understand everything, but I loved looking at his work." This is crayon, paint, ink, and pieces, one of the pieces that Duffy really loved. So next piece. In 1974, Newton moved on to a series of collages. He cut up paper, he arranged them carefully to create a three-dimensional image. And here you're seeing pieces that he did in 1974. So, one of the things about having a lot of pieces of objects from an artist is you can really get a sense of who they are. So it's a lot different than just having one or two pieces. And with Newton, we are lucky to have all these pieces because you can get really a robust sense of the art and how he's thinking about it. These 3 pieces were done with crayon, graphite, ballpoint pen, and tape. Ballpoint pen, he took a pen and he used it to create his lines and his pieces and his geometric images. Like Wassily Kandinsky, next piece, Newton felt that you could hear sounds coming from the painting. Kandinsky thought, well, he actually was a synesthesic. He could hear sounds when he saw color. Newton felt like you could hear the sounds of the piece. And in a moment, we're actually going to see one when we talk about Al Loving. But what Newton did was he created a record. This was a piece done again in 1974. He used graphite and ballpoint pen and crayon and a wash to create this record. Then after that, he did one other piece. Let's see that next piece. He moved on to this piece. This was kind of like a commission. This is a geometric drawing of a cast iron garden. In 1979, the DIA director at the time was Frederick Cummings. He was actually considering creating an outdoor sculpture garden, and he asked Newton to create a plan for it. So Newton designed on paper a series. There's lots of these designs, and these are all cast concrete, and that he called it an indestructible outdoor sculpture garden. And he actually built some of these out of cardboard just to see what they'd look like. So you could see how you would move in and out and where the sculptures would be placed. This is one of the drawings he made, and the garden itself was never built. Next piece, please. Here's a sculpture, an actual sculpture. It's called Sdx Satellite Delay. It has to do with his fascination with technology and machines and his love of literature and art and history. He's commenting here on our preoccupation with technology. It's somewhat whimsical, and it's also frightening in some ways. Just so you all know, all these pieces I'm showing you, we display Newton's pieces, but right now none of them are on view because of the incredible exhibition we have with Detroit Style with cars. And I'm sure that once that exhibition ends in January, when we install the galleries, we'll have Newton's pieces back up. So finally, what we're going to look at is his head series. He had 67 of these pieces, and it was inspired, surprisingly, by the 1998 Olympic Games that were held in Seoul, South Korea. Marianne Wilkinson, in the catalog of his work, writes that Newton was struck by the sheer physical power of the athlete and the superhuman degree of strength and discipline and perfection it took to achieve the accomplishments that the Olympic athlete achieved. But during their TV interviews, they just seemed like regular people that were very vulnerable. That inspired him to do his head series. And he started to create his head series by looking at the far left. You can actually see features, and it looks like a head. And as they evolved, it became less and less, figurative and more abstract. Eventually, everything disappeared. It was like a see-through, transparent skull, and only the ears remained. The paints were slashing, the black lent a sense of violence and fear, the heavy varnish used highlights and permanency. It was very impressive, especially to see all 67 heads. And perhaps one day our print and drawings curators will decide that it's time to bring them out. As you know, we can't show them all the time because they're sensitive and light sensitive. So that gives you a pretty good sense of what a really important artist in the mid-century, in the mid-20th century, was doing and what their work was. Hey, Christine, are there any questions?
Just to comment that Gordon Newton's work is very impressive. It's amazing. And we have a fan of this head series that you're showing right now.
Cool. That's typically displayed at the museum. It's not at the moment because of the cars exhibition, but it's frequently up, and it's considered an important piece by the museum. Howard, he was very diverse. His body of work was extremely diverse. Thanks so much.
I think it's time for Tana. Tana?
It is.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. I love the idea of the record being symbolic of seeing music, that cross-century experience. That's really provocative. I am going to talk about another Detroit icon. This man is a legend. He was...
Dan Levin.
No, not Dan Levin, Charles Mcgee. He lived to be 96 years old, and sadly, he passed away this year, February of this year. But damn, that man made the most of his beautiful, beautiful life. He started off as a sharecropper in the South, and he was part of the Great Migration, early stage Great Migration of Black folks coming north to the Promised Land. He was heavily impacted by his experience as a sharecropper. He said that some of his earliest artistic epiphanies came while he was picking cotton and he was kind of communing with nature. Believe it or not to romanticize that chapter of American history, but this is from the artist's own mouth. When he was picking the cotton, he was able to see the order in nature and the beauty in nature. And that became one of the guiding aspects of his artistic philosophy. He, like I said, he was an institution unto himself, not just because he had such a beautiful mind, but he also had a beautiful heart and a beautiful spirit. He mentored hundreds, if not thousands, of artists in Detroit. He was responsible for starting many different artistic programs. He was the man who brought the first exhibition of Black artists to Detroit. He was the inaugural recipient of the Kresge Arts Foundation Award. He was a Detroiter for many, many, many years, and he attended the College for Creative Studies. He also studied in Spain in 1968, and while he was there, he was taken with the work of Moreau and Picasso. Love for Mcgee extends beyond Detroit. He's a world-renowned artist. He has had exhibits in New York, Bangkok, all over the world. Detroit has some of his seminal pieces, but he's also got this incredible sculpture in front of the Wright Museum. I think we have a slide of it, right, Kimmy? It's called United We Stand. There you go. That, oh gosh, it's beautiful. And that's emblematic of the artist's theory, or again, artistic philosophy. He says that he's trying to understand the order that holds the world together. Because if we understand it, we respect it. And if we all work together, we understand more and we tolerate more and we live better lives. We're able to live together harmoniously. And there's a PBS documentary where Charles talks about his work, and I can't even begin to do it justice. You have to hear him describe his artistic philosophy in his own words. But United We Stand, his philosophy is about togetherness. So the piece that we're going to look at today is Noah's Ark. There you go. And that's part of a series. This is a huge piece. It's 10 by 15, and it's a collage. And the collage is reflective of his life view. So you've got a lot of disparate parts, and they're all coming together to create something beautiful. And, I guess his idea is that as humans, we're a bunch of disparate parts, and we come together. Like when we really come together, we make beautiful things if we're open to it. He picked this piece. It's a Genesis story because, in 96 years, he saw a lot. In Detroit, he saw the civil rebellion. In the 40s, he saw the civil rebellion. In the 60s, and coming from the South, filled with all of that optimism, that really was a spear into his heart, and it filled him with a lot of sadness. And so he used his work, that motivated him to use his work to bring a message of hope and optimism. And he imbued his work with that hope and that optimism. So a lot of what you see in this piece is symbolic of that hope and that optimism. And in particular, when he looked at Noah's Ark, he saw the ark as the great equalizer of all. And then in this particular piece, you see how the theme of connection comes through with the yellow snake. I'm sorry, it's a gray snake that's connecting these different dark-skinned people. And if you look closely at the dark-skinned people, you see that they have blue eyes. And that's another nod to the whole idea of connection. Black and white and all of us with all of our, I don't know. That's another nod to the idea of connection. I should say that this one piece there's another painting that's really cool that is similar to this one. It's on the Detroit People Mover. the individual pieces in the series don't form a continuous narrative. Each piece is thought of as a way to explore pictorial language and spatial structure. They're united by the use of color, light, and rhythm. This is an abstract piece, and it's a collage, like I said before, with fabric, including mud cloth. And there you go. You can see the mud cloth in the arrow there, the dancing arrow. Mud cloth is made by Bamana women of Mali, Africa, and it's worn to mark major life transitions, such as birth, marriage, or death. This piece is actually 4 panels of masonite, and they come together. There's the idea of togetherness again, to form one large canvas. You have a blue triangle to the right, and then you've also got 3 forms that are overlapped by abstract animal shapes and a yellow wavy line with collaged sheets of music, and the background is flecked with color. And you'll see he was kind of like a jazz riffer. He went with the flow and respected it all. And you'll see in the center of this piece, there is an actual bumblebee. And I think we have a picture of that too, a close-up. Yeah. So there's a story behind that. He was in his studio and he had the window open, so he could be one with nature while he was creating. And a bee flew in through the open window and ended up getting stuck on his paint. And so, Charles said, well, I guess it was meant to be. I guess that's where the bee wanted to be. And so he respected it and he allowed it to become part of the piece. And another thing to know is that he picked the Great Flood from the Bible because it was a tale of destruction of people based on the idea of human wrongdoings. And I guess that resonated, that was symbolic of his lived experience of the civil rebellions in the 40s and the 60s. And I guess
this painting is loved by people young and old. I mean, Howard and I have been doing this a little longer than you, Tana. Howard, isn't that been your experience, that young children to adults just are fascinated by this?
Everybody gets something out of it. When it first came up in 1989, I believe, or when we first got it, they made a poster out of it, and that was the one thing that my wife bought, and it's she framed it and had it up on the wall for years. She just absolutely loved this piece, and it's gigantic, and so you can teach kids a lot about it. Plus, it's fun to talk about. It's a fun and whimsical piece.
Yeah,
it is, and it's to be in its presence is to experience the artist's hope for humanity. So I guess that's what I really wanted to leave the viewers with. Hope.
I agree.
Yeah.
Any questions,
Thank you,
Christine?
guys. Any questions?
No, just a comment that Charles Mcgee is truly a legend, internationally known, much loved, left a huge body of work, and we are super lucky that he called Detroit his home, and he lived in Detroit his entire life. So he's a wonderful artist of our city.
He really was. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful spirit. Beautiful spirit. He wasn't just, his life was art. The generosity and the optimism that poured through him was otherworldly. And to be in the presence of his art is to experience some of that.
There's a question about whether he exhibited in Europe, but I honestly don't know that answer. I think we have Detroit Artists Part 2, where if we have any more work of his, we could perhaps research that a little bit. But I know that he was anchored in Detroit, and he did most of his teaching here. And in his older years, when he had trouble doing big works physically, he started working on his laptop and designing. So he accommodated his age by working digitally on his computer.
Ray?
So next slide. Thank you. This is Mike Kelly, who was born in Wayne County in 1954 to a blue-collared Roman Catholic family. In high school, he was part of Detroit's heavy metal music culture, which he continued to be involved in when he attended the University of Michigan. After he graduated from Michigan in 1978, Kelly moved to California and earned his Master's of Fine Art from the California Institute of the Arts. He lived and worked in Los Angeles virtually his entire life until he passed away in February of 2012. He gained international recognition by the mid-1980s. Kelly was the subject of various solo exhibitions by prestigious museums, including the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City, the Tate Museum in Liverpool, England, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona, Spain. When Kelly passed away, the New York Times exclaimed that he was, quote, one of the most influential American artists of the past quarter century and a pungent commentator on American class, popular culture, and youthful rebellion.
Ray, has anybody ever called you pungent?
Not as a commentator, but maybe other times. Kelly his works often question the legitimacy of normative values and systems of authority. They attack the sanity of cultural attitudes towards family, religion, sexuality, art history, and education. His art was really always raw and in your face. And he also used mixed mediums and even engaged in performance art and collaborated with such famous musicians as Paul McCartney. Next slide, Kimmy. Thank you. So this is Carnival Time, and Kelly finished it or completed it in 1990. It's composed of 4 panels. Each panel is acrylic on masonite. The total size of this is 7 feet tall and over 17 feet wide. Kelly is exploring what painting is and can be. He's questioning the conventions of the art world and what is considered high art. The art here, the paintings are in black and white, like a commercial sign, which is inconsistent with fine art painting. Also, these paintings were not meant to be hung on the wall, but set on the floor like a sculpture. This work appears to be playful, but actually it has a serious critical message about the American political landscape. Can we go to the first panel? Right, that's the one to the left. These are heads on poles, and they're portraits of the US political leadership during the George H. Bush administration in 1990, when the painting was completed. Starting at the left, they are in the order of the presidential succession that would have occurred at that time. Could you go back one slide, Kimmy? Thanks. So you have here, starting from the left, you have the president, George Bush, and then you have the vice president, Dan Quayle, and then you have the Speaker of the House, who was Tom Foley, in the center. Then you have Bob Dole, who was a majority leader of the Senate at the time, and finally you have the Secretary of State, James Baker. And on these poles, these thin poles, they look unstable and tipsy. Could you go to the next slide, Kimmy? Yeah, this is a close-up of those heads. And you can see that the heads have no eyes and that there are flies circling the heads. It's reference to the brutal custom or practice of trophy heads, where typically a political leader or enemy's head is decapitated and put up on a pole as an example. Now, the other panels, the other three panels, are also associated with American politics and politicians. And they cover more base elements of popular culture. This image, which is the second image from the right, is obviously of Disneyland and the Magic Castle. But it's a little different than the typical image of the Magic Castle. First of all, the towers have bats coming in and out of them. And then you have this unusual image coming out of the center, or the doorway, the entranceway. You've got Donald, Goofy, and Mickey, who are posed as the famous image of the Spirit of 76, which is the traditional symbol of the American Revolution. But then on either side of those Disney figures are guillotines, which references the French Revolution and the decapitation, again, decapitation, of political leaders and enemies. So what does Kelly mean by this particular panel? Is it a call for a modern revolution to displace the current leadership? Or is the image of Disneyland a reference to Americana? And is he exploring the delusion that is the American facade? Or is this some sort of reference to that it's a fantasy to think of a possibility of a revolution in the United States? That Kelly leaves to the viewer. Next panel, please. This is a sow wearing a party hat, and it's an obvious, crude commentary concerning politicians and the American political system being gluttonous and selfish. Next slide, please. Finally, you have a composite image of hard rock band posters from the 1980s. But this is a very harsh image of a vulgar showmanship and exhibitionism. Kelly seems to be relating that aspect of popular culture, that vulgarness, that vulgar exhibitionism. He's tying it to American politics and politicians. So this work obviously is meant to invoke reflection and invite various interpretations. Interpretations centered on American politics, popular culture, and concepts of high art. Any questions, Christine?
You know, Ray, it's interesting. Go ahead, Christine.
No, go ahead, Howard. We actually don't have any questions.
So, you know, it's really interesting that that he wanted these on the floor rather than hung as pieces, the sculpture, because we were just talking with art historian who talked about one of the ways into art is space and the way it's hung and the way you look at it. Do you look at it from the top down? Do you look at it from the bottom up? So while you were talking about that, I was thinking about how it was always interesting when I'd walk by, it would make me want to look at it more because it wasn't hung on the wall. So it was his way of getting me into the pieces.
Agreed.
So let's move on. If there's no questions.
Is it you, Howard?
Okay. So here's Al Loving. Al Loving now. So, and we're kind of moving back and forth. We're not doing this chronologically. We're sort of finding our own way with this. Al Loving, as opposed to Gordon Newton, who was born in Detroit, worked in Detroit, Alvin Loving was born in Detroit. He grew up in Detroit. He went to the University of Michigan. He got his MFA from U of M, but he began his painting career in New York. He went to New York because of the work he was doing in the 60s. There was a lot of abstract expressionism and minimalism going on, and that's what Loving was doing. That's what he was working on. He was trained. Let's go to the first piece. He was trained by a student of Hans Hoffman, and Hans Hoffman was a teacher in New York that taught people like Jackson Pollock and those famous New York abstract action expressionisms. And he took it and converted that into minimalist art, where he took and used colors and shapes to create form. Cool colors recede, warm colors come forward at you. That's how you create depth in a painting. And then he used straight lines and very simple geometric shapes to create his art, as you see here or in the next piece. So one was cubic boxes. Here's kind of an opening with a screen, creating a sense of depth, using the colors and using the geometric shapes to create those depths. And he was successful almost from the start. He had a show at the Whitney in 1968 where everything he had sold out. It was just overnight success for him. He loved his work, loved his art. People wanted to buy it. They wanted to hang it on his wall, and he became a very successful artist. However, he wasn't happy. He felt like he was stuck inside the box. Well, maybe this is where working out of the box came from, but he said, this is his quote, "I felt stuck inside the box." I mean, it was 1968, the Democratic Convention, the war in Vietnam. I am doing these pictures, and this is all that was going on. There was a great contradiction between my life at the time and my pictures. So he started to move on from this. He began to experiment with fabric constructions. He would tear pieces of fabric, he would paint it. His mother was a seamstress. He had a sewing machine, so he began to sew these pieces of fabric together. And eventually, he explored various quilting techniques and a collage by doing this. Then, in the 1980s, he moved on. You got it, Kimmy. He moved on to spiral shapes. This piece, J.E. and the Uptown A's, was done in 1989. It's normally on view. It's normally one of our permanent pieces that are on view, but it's not now. Now, in this case, he'd work spontaneously. He would take layer upon layer of different papers and corrugated cardboard in spiral and freeform shapes, and he would paint them with using brushes or rolling them on or pouring the paint on or splattering it on surfaces. And then the result is a composition that appears to be in constant motion. Now, remember when I told you that Newton felt you could hear sound in a painting? When I see this piece, I can hear it. I can hear the sound coming out of it. And to me, it sounds like jazz. In fact, the name of the painting sounds like a jazz group. I am not sure where the name of the painting comes from. So it's my opinion, it's my imagination that's telling me that this is a jazzy painting, that it's the J.E. and the Uptown A's was a jazz group, and this is what they would sound like if you would hear them, if you would be in that place. You'd hear the rhythm, you'd hear the riffs that were coming off it, you would hear all those pieces.
It's amazing that he gives a visual image of music. This is what music would look like. It's a terrific piece.
And it's a lot like Wassily Kandinsky, who did the German Expressionists at the turn of the century. Christine?
Hey, Howard,
Yeah.
do we know how big this piece is?
Oh, yeah, we do know how big this piece is. I actually know that, Christine.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. It's 84 inches high by 60 inches by 3 7/8 inches deep. So it's about 4 inches deep.
That's precise.
Well, I knew the answer.
I think you wrote that down.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I just have it in my head.
And there's another comment too in regard to Alvin Loving and about him joining the Documenta and being a very controversial and confronting artist. Did you read anything like that?
No, I did not. I can't comment on that.
Okay.
I do
Thank
have
you.
one correction. When I talked about the cast cement piece that that Newton did, I said he made pieces. He did models out of cardboard, and I was thinking about this piece. It was actually wood, and I don't have any knowledge that we have any of his wood models.
Oh, okay. And you know what? I was incorrect on the question about the Documenta. The viewer meant that to be for Kelly.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I am not familiar with that.
For Mike Kelly?
The depth of his involvement in art is very rich. And off the top of my head, I just don't remember all the specifics of it. He was quite involved and influential.
Okay,
Should we
yeah.
go to
And,
Tana? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mike Kelly also at the Contemporary Art Museum down the street from the DIA. They did a retrospective on him not too long ago. So, he's deeply rooted in Detroit in a lot of ways.
Tana?
Okay. So Tyree Guyton is another Detroit icon. Earlier, I mentioned that Mcgee taught a lot of artists in Detroit. Tyree studied. Tyree was one of those. He studied under Mcgee. He also attributes his artistic education to his grandfather, who was a painter, and his mother, who I'm guessing was some kind of a fashionista. She loved to go to the rummage sales and collect there. And he says that he combines these two family directions and uses found objects and repurposes them to his own artistic end. He also is another person who studied at the College of, what's it called? Creative Studies? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And he also, Howard talked to us earlier about neo-expressionism. Basquiat was a neo-expressionist. Tyree is a neo-expressionist.
Well, you bet he is.
Yeah. And part of the reason why Detroiters love Tyree is because of his Heidelberg Project. There we go. That's that. That is the Heidelberg Project. So where do I start? This is the neighborhood where Tyree grew up. And most of the people who are watching this know that part of Detroit's history included, white flight. And in its wake, you had a lot of abandoned buildings and you had a lot of blight. And Tyree uses his artistry to beautify that, to find the beauty in that and amplify it. So what you're looking at here in the picture on the right is art in the Heidelberg space. You'll see that beneath the art there's empty space, and that comes from houses that had been abandoned, usually had fallen into disrepair and then were demolished. And so out of that, you see art kind of growing from that empty space. But then another thing that really stands out about the picture in the right is all those dots, the multicolored dots. And those are supposed to be symbolic of the diversity in our country, in our world, and how that's all beautiful. And like Mcgee, he was another artist who was a staunch believer in the idea of togetherness. There's a fantastic quote from him. He says, he describes his art as medicine for the community. He says, you can't heal the land until you heal the minds of people. And even the smallest molecule or things in this life that we can't see, we're all bound by this same energy. We're all bound by gravity and we breathe the same air. I can see the evolution of life in everything, in every minute second. How beautiful it is to witness this process in action. So growing up in Detroit, he's got a lot of love for graffiti art. The Heidelberg Project is its own genre of art. Oh, look at that. That's beautiful, isn't it? It's just funky. Really makes you think. He turned what some people would call garbage into something that has a new life as art. Very moving. He's also called an environmental artist, and the urban environmental art is the whole process of beautifying these blighted spaces and giving to the community that still makes a home around these, giving inspiration, artistic inspiration to the community that still finds itself making a home around these blighted spaces, that's still living and striving in spite of all of this adversity. So the piece that we're going to talk about today, there we go, that's it. It's called Caged Brain. And what we're looking at here is a wire bird cage, and it's filled to bursting with ropes. You can see that in the opening, some are falling out of the cage door. And what he is saying here is that adults stop using their brain's full potential at a certain point. And basically, most of us are caged. Like Loving was talking about the boxes, and that those boxes found their way into his art. The same concept is present in Tyree's work, most particularly here. And what he means when he says that we're caged is that our curiosity is stunted by all these different social expectations and unfortunate realities. But there is a way forward. He says that as adults, we lose the inquisitiveness we had as children. We stop using our imagination. And with this image, with his art, he's asking us to think outside the box or cage again and to continue with the questions and the wonder we had in childhood. So, on that note, are there any questions?
Kind of, we're running out of time here, unfortunately. But we'll have a part 2 in June 10th, as Howard mentioned, or as Amanda mentioned. And I just want people to know that we'll cover many artists who are very entertaining and are very important to art. Ed Frega, Nancy Mutchkin, Stephanie Jackson. There will be a number of artists that are either living in the Detroit area or currently living who have contributed so much to the DIA. Next week on Thursdays at the museum will be another virtual tour. This one will be called Through Her Eyes, and it's about women artists at the DIA. And fellow docents Kathleen McBroom and Deborah Combs will be making the presentation. It's a don't miss. It'll be wonderful. So until the next time, please everyone stay safe and be well.